The kingdom of Lord Aeron stood for generations as a shining beacon of hope, prosperity, and unyielding human strength. At the heart of this golden age was Prince Arthas Menethil, the beloved heir to the royal throne. From his earliest youth, the young prince was groomed to be more than just a political ruler. He was inducted into the Sacred Order of the Silver Hand, training to become a defender of the Holy Light. Under the strict fatherly guidance of Uther the Lightbringer, Arthas mastered the ways of the warrior priest. The Holy Light answered the prince's calls with vibrant warmth, healing the sick and warding away evil. During these peaceful years, Arthas also found a kindred spirit in the brilliant young sorceress, Jaina Proudmoore. Their bond grew into a deep romance, offering the heavily burdened prince a rare sanctuary of personal happiness. But the duty of a future king always loomed over him, demanding absolute sacrifice and unwavering vigilance. Shadows began to stretch across the northern borders of the kingdom as unsettling rumors arrived at the capital. Reports spoke of an unnatural sickness rapidly spreading through the small farming communities of the north. Determined to defend his people, Prince Arthas volunteered to investigate the northern farmlands personally. He was joined by Jaina, whose magical expertise was desperately needed to unravel the nature of the affliction. As they traveled deeper into the countryside, the vibrant green landscape slowly withered into sickly shades of gray. They discovered a small abandoned village that was completely devoid of any living human presence. In the center of the town square stood several freshly delivered crates of grain bearing the seal of Andorhall. Jaina detected a foul, unnatural magical residue clinging heavily to the ruined food supply. This was no ordinary disease, it was a deliberately engineered magical plague of undeath. Sudden ragged breathing echoed from the dark doorways of the surrounding ruined cottages. The missing villagers stumbled into the moonlight, their flesh pale, decaying, and utterly devoid of life. Arthas looked upon his own subjects, horrified to see them transformed into mindless, aggressive monsters. With a desperate cry, the young prince unleashed the power of the light to strike down the oncoming horde. Jaina supported him from behind, casting brilliant frostbolts to freeze the relentless attackers in their tracks. Though they managed to defeat the small crowd, the sheer horror of the encounter weighed heavily on Arthas's mind. He realized that every single citizen who consumed the tainted grain was doomed to become an undead puppet. They pressed onward toward Andorhall, the regional distribution center, hoping to halt the spread before it was too late. At the city gates, they encountered a sinister figure cloaked in dark, billowing robes. This was Kel'Thuzad, a rogue archmage who had abandoned Dalaran to serve a dark entity known as the Lich King. The necromancer laughed, taunting the prince with the revelation that the tainted grain had already been shipped away. Overcome by righteous fury, Arthas lunged forward, refusing to listen to the villain's dark boasts. A fierce battle erupted as Kel'Thuzad summoned waves of skeleton warriors from the frozen earth to protect himself. Jaina cast barrier spells to shield the prince from the necromancer's lethal bolts of death magic. Breaking through the undead defense, Arthas delivered a final, crushing blow that brought Kel'Thuzad to his knees. With his final gasping breath, the dying necromancer whispered that his death would change absolutely nothing. He revealed that the true architect of this plague was a powerful demon lord, waiting for Arthas in the city of Hearthglen. The prince knew that Hearthglen was a vital military outpost, completely unprotected against a massive undead siege. He ordered Jaina to teleport immediately to find Uther and bring the full weight of the Silver Hand reinforcements. Arthas then rode alone toward Hearthglen, his heart racing with a desperate desire to protect his people. When he arrived, he found the town already surrounded by an endless army of terrifying undead abominations. The infected grain had already been distributed to the local garrison, meaning the defense was crumbling from within. Arthas rallied the remaining uninfected soldiers, vowing to hold the line until Uther's arrival. The siege lasted through the grueling night, with the undead launching wave after wave against the fragile gates. Arthas fought until his arms grew numb, his holy armor stained with the dark, foul fluids of his fallen enemies. As the dawn began to break, the final inner defenses collapsed, leaving the prince completely cornered. Just as all hope seemed lost, a blinding wave of golden light crashed over the undead lines. Uther and his elite paladins smashed through the monstrous horde, completely decimating the siege in a matter of minutes. Though the town was saved, Arthas stood amidst the smoking ruins, his mind deeply twisted by the horrific near defeat. He realized that traditional military strategies and defensive prayers were simply not enough to stop this viral nightmare. A dark, terrifying realization gripped him as he looked toward the major neighboring trading hub of Stratholme. If the contaminated grain had already reached that massive city, millions of citizens would transform into an unstoppable army of darkness within hours. The realization of the infected grain weighed heavily on Prince Arthas as he rode frantically toward the great northern city. Alongside him, Jaina Proudmoore urged her steed faster, her magical staff pulsing with unstable arcane energy. Lord Uther the Lightbringer commanded the rear guard, his massive warhammer resting firmly against his heavy gold-trimmed armor. The majestic stone towers of Stratholme finally appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against a bruising purple sky. Plumes of thin gray smoke rose lazily from the chimneys, giving an illusion of normal daily routine inside. Suddenly, the foul stench of decay drifted over the high walls, confirmation that Mal'Ganis had already arrived. Arthas dismounted his horse instantly, his heavy iron boots slamming into the damp mud with a loud thud. Nearby, empty grain crates stamped with the Andor hull crest lay scattered carelessly near the marketplace entrance. The prince stared at the contaminated wood, knowing the citizens had already eaten the toxic bread. Uther and Jaina quickly joined him, looking upon the dark city with growing apprehension. Arthas pointed his silver mace toward the streets and declared that the entire population had to be purged. Uther recoiled in absolute horror, his voice booming with righteous indignation at the prince's insane command. The veteran paladin firmly refused to slaughter innocent civilians, even if they carried the plague inside them. Blinded by desperation, Arthas fiercely reminded Uther that as future king, his orders were absolute. With a heavy heart, Arthas officially suspended the Silverhand Paladins from duty for their treasonous defiance. Jaina stepped backward, tears welling in her eyes as she witnessed the madness consuming her beloved prince. Arthas turned to her for validation, but she softly shook her head and refused to watch the impending slaughter. Left completely alone with his loyal soldiers, Arthas drew his glowing weapon and marched into the silent city. The cobblestone streets were eerily empty, save for the flickering lanterns hanging from wooden tavern signs. From behind curtained windows, pale citizens peeked out, coughing weakly as the green infection filled their veins. Arthas kicked open the front door of the nearest house, his heavy armor clanking loudly in the quiet night. Inside, a father was already mutating, his jaw expanding into a horrific visage of an undead ghoul. Closing his eyes to banish remorse, the prince brought his heavy mace down to end the monster's life. Outside, panic erupted like wildfire as the soldiers began purging every home systematically. From the shadows of the central plaza, Mal'Ganis appeared with a cruel, fang-filled grin stretching across his face. The Dreadlord raised his clawed hands, summoning the newly dead souls to rise instantly as slavering zombies. A chaotic race against time began as Arthas fought to kill the infected citizens before the demon could claim them. Screams of the dying echoed off the stone walls, blending into a horrific symphony of destruction. Blood splashed across the prince's pristine silver armor, staining his royal blue tabard with dark crimson. Arthas tracked Mal'Ganis through the burning market, his holy light dimming with every strike he delivered. The demon laughed mockingly, easily dodging the young paladin's rage-fueled attacks among the ruins. Hours passed until the morning sun began to peek through the thick, choking black smoke. The once vibrant city of Stratholme was now a silent, smoldering graveyard of ash and bone. Arthas stood in the center of the town square, surrounded by thousands of bodies he had personally executed. Mal'Ganis emerged from the ash one final time, stepping over the debris with absolute arrogance. The demon hissed that their final battle would not happen here, but in the icy wastes of Northrend. With a sudden burst of dark shadow magic, Mal'Ganis vanished entirely, leaving a cold wind behind. Arthas stared at the empty space, his mind snapping as a singular, burning obsession for vengeance took root. He swore a binding oath aloud to follow the monster to the ends of the earth, no matter the cost to his soul. As he ordered his ships to prepare for the frozen north, an ominous, icy whisper echoed in the wind, welcoming him to his doom. The fleet sailed through the biting winds of the Great Sea, charting a course toward the icy, unknown continent of Northrend. Prince Arthas stood at the bow of his flagship, staring intently at the frozen horizon ahead. The memory of the smoking ruins of Stratholme still burned brightly inside his fractured mind. The soldiers on deck shivered in their heavy wool cloaks, terrified of the hostile land they were approaching. Massive glaciers loomed out of the fog like silent, pale giants guarding a forgotten graveyard. With a thunderous crash, the lead ship ground its wooden hull into the rocky, snow-covered shore. Arthas leaped down into the freezing surf, his heavy golden armor clanking loudly against the stones. He raised his hammer high, gesturing for his weary men to begin unloading their supplies. Suddenly, screeching cries rang out from the high cliffs above their newly established camp. Vile undead monsters ambushed the perimeter, forcing the tired soldiers into an immediate, desperate defense. In the heat of the chaotic battle, gunfire echoed from a nearby ridge, tearing through the undead ranks. Muradin Bronzebeard, a veteran dwarf explorer and old friend, charged forward with his twin axes swinging. Together, the combined human and dwarven forces successfully shattered the immediate undead assault. Muradin explained that his expedition was searching for a legendary artifact hidden deep within the frozen wastes. He spoke of a mysterious, ancient rune blade of immense power known only as Frostmourne. Arthas realized this legendary blade might be the exact weapon he needed to slay Mal'Ganis once and for all. Days turned into a grueling march through relentless blizzards that chilled the men to their very bones. Back at the base camp, an emissary from Lord Aeron arrived suddenly with urgent orders from the king. King Tyrannus had commanded the expedition to abandon their quest and return home immediately. When Arthas learned of the recall, a mad rage consumed him, blinding him to all reason. He knew his men would leave him if they reached the ships, leaving his vengeance unfulfilled. Arthas secretly hired local mercenary warriors to march to the shore and burn his own fleet. Billowing flames soon consumed the vessels, lighting up the dark Arctic sky in a tragic display. The Lord Aeron soldiers rushed to the shore, staring in absolute despair at their destroyed path home. Arthas arrived with his elite guards and immediately pointed an accusing finger at the terrified mercenaries. To hide his own treachery, the prince ordered his furious men to slaughter the mercenaries on the spot. Muradin watched the execution with growing horror, realizing his young pupil was losing his morality. With no way to retreat, Arthas told his stranded army that their only survival lay in total victory. Soon after, Mal'Ganis' main Scourge army surrounded the camp, trapping the humans in a vice. Realizing their defenses would fail, Arthas begged Muradin to lead him directly to the hidden runeblade. Leaving his men to hold the line, the two heroes slipped away into the treacherous mountain passes. They eventually reached an ancient cavernous vault etched with glowing forbidden runes. Ghostly elemental spirits materialized from the frost, desperately trying to block their advance. Arthas fought through the guardians ruthlessly, refusing to let anything stand in his way. In the center of the chamber, floating inside a massive pedestal of solid ice, rested Frostmourne. Muradin stepped closer and read the ancient inscription carved upon the weapon's frozen pedestal. The dwarf shouted that the blade was cursed, warning that it would scar the wielder's soul. Arthas ignored the warning, declaring he would gladly bear any curse to save his homeland. He called upon the spirits of the cavern to release the blade from its icy prison. With a deafening explosion, the pedestal shattered, throwing deadly shards of ice outward. A stray shard struck Muradin down, leaving the noble dwarf motionless upon the frozen floor. Arthas glanced at his fallen friend for only a second before turning his back on him forever. He stepped forward and firmly wrapped his gauntleted hands around the leather hilt of Frostmourne. As he lifted the weapon, an icy shockwave surged up his arms, freezing the blood in his veins. In that single tragic moment, his golden hair bleached snow-white and his humanity withered away. Armed with the dark blade, Arthas returned to his besieged camp like a specter of death. With effortless, terrifying strikes, he completely annihilated the invading undead forces single-handedly. He eventually confronted Mal'Ganis in the center of the snowy battlefield, his eyes burning with malice. The Dreadlord laughed, claiming that the dark voice Arthas now heard in his mind was the Lich King himself. Arthas whispered that the voice was commanding him to destroy the demon, before striking with absolute finality. As Mal'Ganis dissolved into ash, Arthas wandered alone into the howling blizzard, completely unaware that his transformation into a monster had just begun. The howling blizzard of Northrend slowly faded into the background as the dark silhouette of a massive iron vessel cut through the misty northern waters. Standing at the bow of the warship, Prince Arthas looked toward the shores of his homeland with dead, unblinking eyes. The golden hair that once symbolized the hope of Lord Aeron had withered into a stark, ghostly white. Beneath his dark, newly forged plate armor, the faint whisper of the Lich King echoed constantly within his mind. Word of the heroic prince's return spread like wildfire across the capital city, prompting thousands of citizens to gather in celebration. Bright red rose petals rained down from high balconies, covering the stone cobblestones in a vibrant, festive carpet. The heavy iron gates of the inner palace creaked open as the prince walked slowly through the falling petals. Flanking the prince were two cloaked figures whose faces remained completely hidden in deep shadow. A sudden, unnatural chill swept through the grand corridor, causing the cheering guards to quiet down in confusion. At the far end of the magnificent throne room sat King Tyrannus Menethil, his face beaming with grandfatherly relief. Arthas marched toward the dais, the heavy metal of his boots ringing loudly against the pristine marble floor. Dropping to one knee before the throne, the prince bowed his head in a gesture that mimicked his old humility. King Tyrannus stood up from his seat, extending his arms to welcome his beloved son back from the war. You no longer need to bear the weight of your crown, father, Arthas muttered as he slowly stood back up. The king gasped in horror as his son drew a massive, rune-carved blade that glowed with an eerie blue light. With a single, swift motion, Arthas drove the cursed sword directly through his father's chest. The golden crown of Lord Aeron slipped from the old man's head and rolled clattering across the blood-stained floor. Outside the palace walls, the sky turned a bruised purple as thousands of undead ghouls flooded into the streets. The joyous cheers of the citizens instantly transformed into blood-curdling screams of terror and desperation. Lord Aeron's proud defensive forces tried to rally, but they were quickly overwhelmed by the endless tide of dark magic. Arthas stood on the palace balcony, watching his childhood home burn to ashes with absolute indifference. Under the direct command of the Lich King, the new Death Knight set his sights eastward toward the magical kingdom of Quel'Thalas. The Scourge army marched through the pristine elven forests, leaving a blackened scar of death across the green earth. Ranger General Sylvanas Windrunner stood firmly in their path, unleashing waves of arrows upon the invading dead. Despite her brilliant tactics, Arthas easily shattered her defenses and cornered the brave elf commander. Refusing to grant her a peaceful death, he tore her soul from her body and transformed her into a mourning banshee. The high elven capital of Silvermoon fell shortly after, its mystical sunwell corrupted to resurrect Kel'Thuzad as an immortal lich. With the powerful lich by his side, Arthas marched onto Dalaran to summon Archimonde, the Lord of the Burning Legion. The magical city of Dalaran crumbled into dust as a giant demonic entity was brought into the mortal realm. Suddenly, a sharp pain pierced through Arthas's chest as the Lich King's voice cried out in agony from the north. Illidan's Stormrage was attempting to destroy the Frozen Throne, forcing Arthas to flee back to Northrend immediately. Returning to the icy continent, the prince found the landscape locked in a brutal three-way war for dominance. At the base of the massive glacier, Illidan stood waiting with his twin demonic blades glowing in the dark. The two champions engaged in a ferocious duel, their weapons colliding with enough force to shatter the surrounding ice. With a desperate upward slash, Arthas sliced through his opponent's chest armor and left him bleeding in the snow. Turning away from his defeated foe, the prince began his long ascension up the winding stairs of the glacier. At the pinnacle of the world stood a massive pillar of ice containing a strange, horn-adorned helmet. Arthas swung his sword with all his remaining strength, shattering the frozen prison into a million sparkling shards. He picked up the Helm of Domination and slowly lowered it onto his own head, finalizing the Eternal Pact. As his eyes snapped open with a blazing eternal blue fire, Prince Arthas Menethil ceased to exist, and the Lich King finally sat complete upon his throne.